So I'm Jakub Jablonski. I come from Poland, and I'm a designer, art director, and also director for game trailers, for commercials. But I also am co-owner and co-founder of a company called Juggler Games, where we created My Memory of Us game. This is like my second job. It was because right now I'm just consulting the team on different projects. My main job is working at Platish Image, which is like a post-production studio in Poland, where I direct game cinematics. Yes, My Memory of Us, it was like 2 years of production, and I was writing the story, directing it, and doing art direction also, and all the visual look. There were actually 2 artists involved, me and the girl named Asha Skiba, and she did like almost half of the visuals you can see inside the game.
That's great. Yeah, Barry, thank you so much for your answer. I will tackle, I mean, I have sent you the questions, so you will see that I will tackle the graphics and the design later on. Let me start, if you want, with some ice-breaking questions that are quite simple, just like to have a brief introductory process in this interview. So could you describe, please, the game in your own words, like My Memory of Us? How would you describe it in your own words?
Yeah, so it's a very simple adventure game based on storytelling that tells a universal fairy tale about friendship. Obviously, there are some vibes about history and about very dark moments in our history, obviously, but these are treated like through the lens of imagination, filtered by children's imagination, which is the most important factor. It's not literal, and it's a parallel. And this was like the most important thing for us, because Juggler Games at the time was super small studio, and huge stories about huge historical topics and sociological topics also are not for small studios. So I could tell the story of My Memory of Us literally, like in a form of movie, if I was Steven Spielberg, but I'm not. So I had to design a way that will make me credible, first of all, because the topic is very delicate, and I wanted to be like very credible. So I found out that designing a fairy tale is the best solution. Because My Memory of Us doesn't present violence, which is also a very important thing for me. Because fairy tales, especially these made for children, rarely show the violence, yeah? And when you play the game and when you're educated, which is not so obvious in current times, you will obviously see that the game is inspired by Holocaust events, especially Nazi occupation of Poland during Second World War. But we do not show dates. We do not name the places. We do not show flags. We don't show religious icons. And all we show is friendship, because this game is not about suffering. It's about hope. There were so many movies, so many pop culture products about this period of time, which concentrated on suffering or the loss, all the consequences. And as I said, we're a small studio. We can talk only about a small fragment of this piece. And we decided that we need to tell a story about hope. And that was our priority. The second most important thing in My Memory of Us, and because it's a fairy tale, so we had children characters. And this entire fairy tale idea is presented in such a way that is filtered by children's imagination. So it's naive. It's never literal, it's never too serious. Sometimes it's dark, but it's fantasy. The game starts when a young girl in current times, or in a different universe, it doesn't matter at the end, yeah. But in present times, she discovers a book in an old antique shop, and the book is full of images drawn by children, yeah. And these images show fantasy, robots, creatures, strange times. but she also discovers half of the picture. And this half of the picture presents the image of the girl, which is very similar to herself. And this starts conversation with the old bookstore keeper, and he tries to tell her his story about his past. And because she's a small girl, and because she likes fantasy, because she's inspired by these drawings, he's telling her a fairy tale. He will never tell her a real story, like using literal facts, what he suffered and what he discovered. He tells it in a form that is digestible for her. And somehow I think that topics like Holocaust, occupation, they obviously should be told in a literal ways, but that's one shelf. But there is also the second shelf, which can be a bit more universal when we have all this fantasy, parallel universes, metaphors. And this is the way we can tell this stories like this to children. But it's not only because of it, because the story is designed in such a way that it can be played and digested by children, but it's also suitable for adults. And this is just like Pixar movies do it, yeah? They try to tell the story which is attractive for children, but there are some details which can be very attractive for their parents. And like 2 layers of humor. One is digestible by younger audience, and the second one is it's not invasive, but it can be read only by adults. And this fantasy look for Memory of Us and the way the story is told should produce like invisible weight of the historical events. We do not show it, but it's always there. And I hope that it works, that people who know the history a bit, they will feel the burden, the historical burden, but also the burden that is carried by main characters.
Yes, thank you so much for such an extensive and elaborated response. I mean, it was great. And I mean, I will tackle like further on the historical relatedness to the game, like the accuracy, and why do you choose those like to approach it from a kid's vision, which I think was like a very interesting idea. But first of all, I want just to ask you, what role do you have in creating My Memory of Us? So you are the art director. So what was the task that you had to do while designing the game? Thank you.
Yeah. So I wrote a story, designed the narration for the entire game, but also I did the art direction. And what art direction means? First of all, you need to decide how the game is going to look, what kind of emotions in terms of visual way of interaction with the game it will produce. And because the story is a fairy tale, so the look should be also matching the fairy tale concept. And in this case, because the story is told through children images, I wanted this one to look a bit naive. So it's definitely not fresh Disney, Pixar, super cartoony, extra designed, super modern. Yeah, it's a bit naive, it's a bit clunky, not perfect. It's hand drawn and hand painted entirely. There is no like CGI involved here. Everything is handcrafted here. And I also came with this idea that the game should be black and white, with only one exception, with the use of color red. And first of all, there are not so many games which are black and white. It's a rare case, but also I was super inspired by Schindler's List, especially by the use of the red color, and was used only in a couple of places. I believe mainly for the girl in the red dress, who is obviously our inspiration for the main character. And this red color is used like in 2 ways in an entire game. First of all, it's the color that marks people. Yeah, when the evil king invades this city, which obviously is Warsaw, he divides population into two categories. Yeah, one of them are going to be red, and the rest will stay in black and white. The red guys are going to be the victims, and they are going to live in a separate place behind the wall. And this is what actually happened. Yeah, but the red color also, because I wanted this one to stay super simple, says what's interactive and what's not interactive. So we have the storytelling use of the red color, and gameplay use of the red color. And obviously, it sometimes will create a toxic mixture, because there are going to be like some items which are not matching the storytelling idea of being red, but somehow it also makes the entire game very consistent. The second interesting thing is the inspiration coming from the very early Disney, yeah, black and white cartoony Disney. But I'm not a Disney artist, and I didn't want to steal the look, so I simply made it my own. And it's inspired. Somehow it looks a bit like it's from 60s, 80 years ago, but it's also maybe not modern, but it's also from this century. Yeah, there's no deeper meaning behind the way characters are drawn. Yeah, they should be sympathetic. You should like them. They should be not realistic, and they should be naive. And I think that's visible in the game. But we also have this language of communication, because game is narrated by Sir Patrick Stewart, but we can hear human voice only in the very short cinematics which are between levels. But during the gameplay, we use different language of communication, which is based on icons. So it doesn't require any translation. And these are super simple emoticon icons. Yeah, characters say, I'm happy, I need an apple, I'm hungry, oh, there is an evil robot here, and hello, watch out, etc. It's super simple, it's readable for everyone, and we obviously do not need subtitles for it. Yes, and there's also one ingredient, because it's fairy tale, because it's fantasy. So sometimes we need to show historical things which are stylized. Yeah, and there's this thing not everyone liked in the game, because we have fantasy stylization. This piece of fantasy is called steampunk, which means you produce lots of steam machines. Well, to be much more specific, it's called dieselpunk, because dieselpunk is based on fuel and fuel engines, etc. And I think that it matches the World War II period very well. But the robot issue, yeah, all the Nazi, all the Germans, all the evil guys here are presented as robots. And some say that this is a problem, because we don't show real people who did the bad stuff. Yeah, but we don't care, because it's not about them. It's about children. And this is how we believe they could see the evil guys.
That was such a great response. Thank you so much. I was personally fascinated by the use of red color, because I mean, I of course watch the Slinders List, and I detect the influence. Right, I started playing the game, and I personally felt that it had a very strong effect in when the red people were somehow marginalized or discriminated by these Nazi robots. So yeah, I really appreciate your response, because it was like very enlightening. Yeah, I would want to ask you right now, because you told me that you were the co-founder of Juggler Games, that you were also like the I can call it the screenwriter, right, of the game. You write the story. So what were your intentions when you in building a video game around this serious matter? Because of course, like the Holocaust and the Second World War II is a very, as you have mentioned before, very fragile and delicate topic, and even sadly nowadays is even more. So what were your intentions in building such a fine game that presents this serious topic in such an innovative and unique way? Thank you.
Well, I'm an artist, and all people working in Juggler Games are artists too. We are not politicians, we are not educators, we are not teachers, but we somehow felt that we need to tell this story. This is something that happened here in Warsaw, in Poland. And because the Juggler Games is super small studio, and it's not, we decided that we need to create storytelling games. Because we had no access to super cool technology. We were not using super complicated engines. We had no space to design very complicated game mechanics. So we decided that we need to craft a story that's interesting and use old school mechanics, old school technology to tell it, because this is what we feel. But also it was a logical solution. Yeah. Not everyone knows, but in Warsaw there were two uprisings. Yeah, one was the ghetto uprising, which was obviously a Jewish uprising, but then there was this huge Warsaw uprising, which was even worse. Yeah, and almost entire city was destroyed. Well, maybe not almost, 99% of the city was destroyed. So it was even worse than Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Even though there was no atomic bomb here. If you'll see the images from the Warsaw after this uprising, it's like flat earth. Nothing is there. And we decided that we want to tell a story of these two uprisings. But obviously the budget was small, so we decided that we will tell the first half. And if the game will be a success, we will tell how the story. We will tell the progress of the story, and we will finally find a frame for it, and we will tell the story of two uprisings. But we need to start with the first one. In Warsaw, there is there's this monument of a child in the helmet. Well, obviously, it's not a positive monument nowadays. Yeah, in today's perspective, it doesn't want to show children with in helmets and with firearms, but it was like this. Yeah, children were fighting in the ghetto and also during Warsaw Uprising, and this inspired us that our heroes need to be children.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I didn't know about the two operations. I knew, of course, the ghetto of Warsaw, but the second operation was also very, very interesting to me. So yeah, I would definitely do some research on that, because it sounds very, very interesting and relevant and also fascinating. So thank you so much for sharing that. And now I want to.
It was the biggest uprising ever in the human.
Yeah, I mean, sadly, in Spain school, there is no much taught about a Second World War, for instance, because since Spain did not participate in it, at least officially, textbooks do not really tackle it or address it. This is why I believe these kind of games are very useful to provide us with a kind of a imaginary, let's say, or a picture of what happened to the younger generations, so they can also recognize the events or what really happened in those dark years. So now I want to move on to the story per se, to the story of My Memory of Us. So you have already said it, that you designed it as a fairy tale, and I personally believe it works pretty well in the game. I think it makes it more digestive, that you can do not feel bad about playing a game that is inspired, developed during the Holocaust. It's not that hard. So I think it works pretty well, but at the same time, it also, you perfectly recognize the historical events. You know that the robots are the Nazis, even though they are not explicitly mentioned. You know that it takes place during the Second World War and the Poland occupation by the Nazi regime. So I mean, you might have already mentioned, but I want to ask you explicit these questions for for our project. So why did you decide to approach this historical period through a fictional plot instead of using historical events, historical dates, facts, so on, like other games. Let's say, for instance, Call of Duty or Battlefield, that I'm aware that they use like very specific dates and events, even though like the approach of the game is totally different, because one is like an action with only one goal, which is kind of like defeating the enemy, and this one is like, in my opinion, deeper, has like a moral values, ethics, like some sort of like historical teachings underneath. So why did you decide to use a fictional plot instead of a historical one? Thank you.
Yeah, so to tell the historical plot, you need to be big and super credible. Yeah, Spielberg can do like all the historical stories very literally. And Juggler Games is a super tiny studio, and I love fairy tales, so everything matches here. But there are also two inspirations, because I obviously love cinema. I'm also a director, and I loved Pan's Labyrinth and Life is Beautiful by the Italian movie. And they say these two films do the same. They tell tragic stories through the filter of children's imagination. And this is how I see the world. I'm 41, but I'm still a child. I like to draw fairy tales. I like to read fairy tales. I like to read them to my child, but I also like to read them for myself. And in Warsaw, in 2022, on every corner of almost every street, you still can see monuments, panels expressing historical events from the Second World War, and especially from the Nazi occupation, and also from Warsaw Uprising. So it's still here. And there is one super interesting thing. It's not so clear for everyone. Okay, we are using parallel, so it's not super easy that we are referring to this World War II period, but it was actually quite difficult for most of the players we showed the game to perfectly identify the period. We were showing this game a couple of times in the States before the game hit the shelves, and there were notes like this. Oh, is it about Trump's wall? Oh, is it about communism? Yeah, it was so hard to identify for some American players what actually it is about. They could feel the vibe. They had no problem to identify that it's about discrimination, that it's universal. That they never felt in a perfect way where and when they actually are. Obviously, not all of them, but this showed me that this actually is important, and we need to produce games like this and still talk about this topic, because maybe people are not so well educated like we think. Because, for example, for us in Poland, it's like super obvious that it happened, yeah. But even American pop culture, done by huge names, does so many historical mistakes and shows only one perspective. And the occupation in Poland was the worst. For helping a Jewish family or for hiding a Jew, you could die. And this wasn't like this in France and in other countries. So it was, I believe, the most difficult, yeah. And also the Polish people, they shared Holocaust with the Jewish guys, yeah. For example, most of us Polish people, we think about Jewish population here as about Polish. They were like part of our population. I come from, right now I live in the city of Warsaw, but I come from the city of Łódź, which was named like city of four cultures: Polish, Jewish, German, and Russian. And now there's only one. And I think that we miss these cultures. Something really bad has happened, and we can see the food is gone, the culture is gone. Obviously, there are some festivals, restaurants, etc. But the place became a bit more generic. And this is what I feel. Yeah, obviously, I didn't live in the war during the World War II period, so how to name it? For me, it's like a phantom pain.
I see. I mean, I it's very, very interesting what you have said about, for instance, like the maybe the players are not as well educated as we think they are. That's very, very interesting, because for me, when I was playing the game, it was obvious that it was tackling Second World War and Nazi regime. Even the costumes of the robots resemble somehow the Nazi uniforms. So you only need like to watch some movies like Schindler's List or Life is Beautiful or or any game that appears like a German soldier in The Great Escape to identify that it was inspired by the Second World War and the Nazi occupation of a European country. Even, I mean, you can miss the country, but you must know that it's the Nazi occupation. So it's very interesting for me to see that a lot of players were not identifying the underlying theme of the game. And I want to make you a follow-up question on this. Is not in the paper because it just popped up while I was listening to you. Do you think that these games, like my memory of us, that do not explicitly refer to these historical events, like explicitly, are in danger by the populist discourse that propel or extol misinformation, inaccuracy of historical facts, and so on?
I don't think that I completely understand your question. Could you form it like in a different way?
Yes, absolutely, no problem. So, for instance, like your game does not explicitly refer to historical events, right? It's not saying the Nazi conquer and occupy Poland and they were brutal against the Polish people, the Polish population. So right now we have several populist governments or very powerful populist parties across the world, like mostly in every country. And most of these populist parties are characterized by using lies or misconceptions that lead to disinformation to the population. So they maybe, I don't know, like in 2024, Trump, when he's reelected, says that, World War II was not a Nazis' fault, for instance. So do you think like this kind of like political discourse that is not credible for people that are well educated might also use these kind of games that do not explicitly refer to historical events as a weapon or as a mechanism to spread their lies?
Unfortunately not. I don't think that, well, in cinema you have art house, yeah? Art house is this small part of cinema which, let's say, it's not very popular. But this is the place that we can talk about complicated feelings, more difficult situation, complicated sociology. Yeah. And we also have such place in games, especially after indie boom. Many super small companies, they decided they want to tell private stories from their own life, from life of their friends, but also some historical events. But Memoir is a super small game. We got cool reviews. It's like almost, it's after, I don't know, it's even more than 90% of positive reviews on Steam. But the game wasn't a success. It actually didn't make it didn't return the money we put into it. Yeah. So it almost killed the company. Thankfully, somehow company still lives, but games small like this, without marketing, without huge production values, they're just shards. They are produced for very specific people. Yeah. The only game I could find like which was similar to My Memory of Us is actually my favorite game from Ubisoft, which is Valiant Hearts. And this was my main inspiration. Yeah, I love the game. I was crying on the game. But this was not the most popular Ubisoft game. Yeah. So in order to fight with lies, and as I told you, I'm not a politician. I'm not a historian. And I don't want to express my political views through the game. I'm just talking about feelings, which I believe are universal for every culture and for almost every period. But I don't think that you can weaponize games. I think that you can use them to make people a bit more caring, sensitive, which is quite important. But to weaponize such games, you should make them bigger. And this part of gaming is called meaningful gaming. Yeah, meaningful games. It's a new concept. Actually, in Poland, you have also a studio called 11 Bits. They did this beautiful Frostbank game. It's about, I don't know if you interviewed them or not, but it's also about populism. And you can become a populist there too, because it's not a storytelling-based game, but it's like a story about building the city and managing it. So in Poland, it's quite popular concept to create meaningful games. Yeah, even all the Witcher series is based on the books, which are quite meaningful because they are not typical fantasy books. They present discrimination. They talk about empowerment of women. They are quite modern and still up to date. Someone said when playing our game, I don't know his nationality, but he said something like this: "I love your dark Polish games." Yeah, so we want these to be meaningful. But huge games also do it. Like even the newest God of War does it. Yeah, it's about fatherhood. It's about stronger ideas. Yeah, Last of Us. It's definitely very mature. It will make you more sensitive, and it will make you cry at the end. So it's a good entertainment. But to use it to fight with populism, I'm not so sure. But we shouldn't use games to fight with populism. We should use games to make people more sensitive, feel more, ask more questions, and that would be great. That would be enough.
Absolutely, I absolutely agree. I mean, that in fact would help like counter populist lies, because the moment that you start asking yourself questions about stuff, then you're just like countering misinformation, for instance. So I love your answer. I think is a very great answer, and it's great to hear from a game developer or game designer, because sometimes you read a lot of academic papers that are written by scholars that are of course great, but they are like very theoretical, and it's great to have your practical point of view, like from that stems from your experience, your professional experience. So it is great. So thank you so much for that. Now I want to move on to one thing that you have mentioned about the game, of my memory of us, of course, which is that you didn't show violence, and I agree with that. But at the same time, it was like very, very implicit. It was very subtle, very elegant, the way you show it, because you, of course, didn't show mass killings or the gas chambers, for instance, but you did show extrajudiciary detentions where like citizens were arrested arbitrarily, or lootings where the stores were just emptied by the robots, or discrimination, like when the people were colored in red, like some of the population were laughing at them. That part of the game really, really touched me. But you did not show, of course, like explicit violence, like and I believe it's because of educational purposes, right? But this question wants to I mean, I want to ask you here, like, by showing just one part of the violence, which is maybe the least personal one, so lootings, marginalization, discrimination, and so on, and avoiding like murders or mass killings or personal detentions, to what extent can this be misleading to the player? So for instance, like, to what extent a young player that is like, let's say 10, 11, 12 years old, that is playing this game, could perceive this like, okay, the Second World War wasn't that bad. It was just, okay, people empty these stores, but they did not kill people, for instance. So do you think that it could be like some sort of like confusion produced in the player, or it wouldn't? It would be like just like one piece in a mosaic that will help people understand what the reality was at that time. Thank you.
One piece of the mosaic is the perfect expression, because as I said, this game has educational values. It can be used as a tool, but it's not a final destination. It's not a historical book. Even though, if you will play this game very carefully, you will see that all the events presented here, they match historical events, even in a very tiny details. When the wall started, what happened with people behind the wall. There is a small game about searching for radio. The radio was forbidden in a ghetto. We don't show gas chambers, but for example, we show the effect of gas chambers, but without showing bones, bodies, and so on. We showed this game in Poland, which is the biggest Polish museum of Polish Jews history in Poland. It's one of the most modern museums in Europe. And some of the historians from this museum, they didn't like the game because they had no idea how to tell not literal story, and they simply didn't get, like, for them it was dark magic. Maybe they don't play games, or maybe they play only historical games, like, I don't know, Panzer General, with dates, tanks, names, numbers, etc. This is a storytelling game, so it's about feelings, it's not about dates. But there was one lady, I don't remember her name, and she told me that in Yad Vashem Institute there's an installation. I'm telling her story, so I can make some mistakes, but you can check it, I think, because it was pretty famous. But there's installation which teaches children about Holocaust and conditions, and it's not literal. They use expressions like there was no jeans trousers or no sweets, because they filter these messages not to harm these children, but somehow I think that for today population, for younger audience, especially not prepared to see atrocities, it's impossible to believe that it actually happened. So we need to design a language that sells them the first layer of this information. And that's why it cannot be the final destination. If you play the game, there is some historical some historical information there. You can unlock history of certain characters, like Polish and Jewish characters, living during the period. You cannot unlock like entire history of Poland or entire history of Nazi occupation. But through this game, you can literally experience something which was the most moving for me, because there's this story of the orphanage behind the wall, led by Janusz Korczak, who was Polish-Jewish teacher who's like wrote so many beautiful books, and even Germans recognized him and they allowed him to escape, but he decided that he needs to stay with his children in a concentration camp. So we showed this character. He's interactive. You can read about him and you can experience his entire story through gameplay. Obviously in super, modest conditions, because the budget, as I told you, was like small. So we decided we want to talk about memory shards, tiny things. Obviously, we put them on the linear historical storytelling, which is correct. We do not make mistakes. We do not show stuff that didn't happen. But you can use these tiny shards. You can later talk with your teachers. You can talk with your friends. You can talk with your parents, and maybe they will tell you more, because this is not our job. Art should inspire. I deeply believe that there is information in art, but it's not a final information. It's not the final destination. So as you told at the beginning, it's a piece of the puzzle.
Thank you so much. I really like your answer. I think it's very, very comprehensive, and it really touches upon the difference, or the misperception between just one piece of a puzzle, as you said, or the bigger picture, and the final destination. The final destination should be a report, or maybe a book, like a historical book, something like that, or even an academic paper. But pieces of art, even though it's like a video game, a film, or a painting, it should maybe raise more questions rather than to say like this has happened and this is the way it was, right? So it was like more like, look, these feelings, like how I felt at that time when this was taking place. So thank you so much for your answer. I want to go with with your influence. Like I was playing the game, and of course, like I love movies and I love cinema. I myself work in a film analysis journal as well, as a film analyst, and I could see, of course, like the Schindler's List, Steven Spielberg's Schindler's List was like the most tangible, let's say, the most obvious reference, and I think it worked very, very well in the game by painting the characters in red, the ones that were like to be marginalized or extermined. On the other hand, I also perceive, I don't know, I might be mistaken, because also like I watched that movie like before playing your game, so it was like quite a nice coincidence, but I perceive like René Clément's The Forbidden Games influence in the game, where there are two characters, like a young couple of kids in the Second World War, and they were just like kind of like having this naive perspective of how the war was going, and they just like came up with this game, very childish game of doing like their own graveyard in the middle of the biggest massacre in humankind history. So I really like those maybe could be like direct or indirect references, because like those movies are so big that even though you haven't watched them, they just like came to your mind even though you haven't watched them. So it's great. But regarding the red color, while I was playing the game, something happened, and I think it was like very, very, very powerful. Is when you color the little girl in red, which was at the beginning, right? So the girl is colored in red, and then she experiences in first person the effects of being colored in red. So she cannot enter in some spaces that that the little boy can enter. So you have to split them. The guy enters in these like how do you say, like restricted spaces, and the girl has to find like an alternative pathway. And so on. And then the guy decides himself to color himself in red so he can go to get the food, right? So with and to be with her friend in this sort of like concentration camp or like departure station to this other place. So I felt it was like very, very powerful idea. On the other hand, when you also color some of the other objects, as you mentioned, that express the dynamics, I felt like it a bit lost. It lost a bit its power, but I understand, because also it gave the game like a very good aesthetic. So, what was your narrative purpose when you decided to color the characters that were to be marginalized in red?
Was there a question here?
yeah, just the last one. Sorry, I talk a lot and I really enjoy your game. So it's like, I just want to mention that I love some of the decisions. So here is like when you decide to use the red color to mark the people who are to be marginalized or executed, what is your narrative purpose together with the in the game, within the game? So it's like to show like the difficulties these people underwent, or just like
Okay.
aesthetic decision. Yeah.
So because you have no violence and because you have no flags, you have no nations in this game. Yeah, in the first main layer, because obviously you can collect some stuff and unlock historical info. But in this main storytelling layer, there is no nations, no flags, and it's hard to say who is Jewish, Polish, German, yeah? Because at the end, it doesn't matter. Because the girl and the boy, they're just friends, they're kids. And for them, from their perspective, it doesn't matter, yeah? And they don't understand why they were divided. What the fuck? Why we are going to live behind the wall, yeah? But obviously, you need to be quite mature to understand stuff about religion, about cultural influence, to get the idea behind the evil things that happened. There was some kind of a sick purpose, yeah? But children didn't get it. It was abstract. So the color marking is also very abstract, yeah? And the game shows it in such a way that it's almost random. But there's a population that's divided and no one knows why, because these people live together and they are somehow bound. So from my perspective, but it's an artistic filter, yeah? It's not a historical teaching. I wanted to show these people as one population, as friends, as families, which somehow one day were divided in a random way. And because there are no flags, I need to use a symbol for dividing. And obviously there are no Jewish symbols too. So the simplest symbol is color, especially in the black and white game. And obviously it's also used as an interactive tool, but this is a game and you have mechanics inside the game. It's not a movie. So sometimes the mechanical layer of the game is going to not interact well with the storytelling way of the game. At the end of the game, games are toys. And maybe toys are not the best tools to tell super complicated stories, but they can do it.
I really think that you really succeed in approaching this togetherness feeling of the population and of the game, the population that was victim. When I was playing the game, I really felt that it was like I underwent those feelings. So I want to say like big congratulations on that, because I think it's a very difficult feeling to transmit through a game. As you have said, like maybe games are not the adequate tool to transmit such complicated feelings, but I think that you really made it. So in my opinion, as a gamer and right now as an interviewer of you, I think like it was like very, very interesting game in that aspect of transmitting those feelings, and this is why we selected it for this interview series. So I just want to ask you one last question, and I will not steal more of your time, I promise. So my last question is like more abstract, and you have already said that video games are not the ultimate destination in transmitting an idea, right? But just like in general terms, not only apply to my memory of us, like in general terms, every video game, what role can video games play in boosting society's collective memory on these historical events?
The same as any other art medium. At the end of the day, there is no huge difference between games and movies. Yeah, they can express the same kind of feelings, emotions. Obviously, not most of games are not based on storytelling, because games have these mechanics, interaction, and storytelling can be part of interaction, but it also can be not interactive. Yeah, but they are great tools to tell stories and create feelings. It's more difficult to use them to tell these stories, because games are much more complicated entity than movies will ever be. Yeah, movies are one-layered, linear, end is always in the same place, and the beginning is always at the beginning. And in games, sometimes it's hard to know. Yeah, the games that you need to start every 20 minutes, like the roguelike genre, yeah? And you die every 15 minutes. And dying is not dying, it's just piece of mechanics, because you are born once again. But even through such gameplay frames, you can tell stories and create emotions. And the biggest difference between games and movies, it's not interaction only, it's the time you spend with the game. The movie is like it's 19 minutes, 2 hours. And when you binge watch a TV series, it's like obviously hour after hour after hour. Yeah. And games, especially based on repetitive mechanics. And my memory of us is linear game. It's like 5 hours to finish it. It's not a roguelike game, it's an adventure game. But with games, you can spend literally endless amount of hours. Yeah. If the world is open, my friends play, for example, Call of Duty games or huge role-playing games like for more than 600 hours. But when you spend so much time inside the game, it means that it's more like a sport for you. So I think that games are a very complicated piece of art. And like with every piece of art, they can reach the highest levels, gain awards and tell super complicated, beautiful stories which will make you cry and feel better or want to be better, but they also can deliver the simplest entertainment too. And obviously, most of them delivers the simplest entertainment, which doesn't make them worse. It's simply another shard of art sphere. They are not more powerful in telling engaging stories than movies are. But sometimes when you control characters and when you want to experience, for example, becoming evil, becoming populist, or you fight your way not to become one, then maybe you will understand more about human psychology and how the society works. But it's My memory of us doesn't do it. You should check Frostpunk and games that are simulating world rather than telling a single story. There's also this 11-bit actually did 2 games like this. One is Frostpunk, and another one is super famous, This War of Mine. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that there's more games in their games than in My Memory of Us. My Memory of Us is almost an interactive fairy tale with pieces of mechanics. I would say that this fairy tale idea is unique, and the way we present our sensitivity is unique. But in terms of gameplay, the game is not unique, not very unique.
Congratulations on that, because I really enjoy my time playing this game. Thank you so much also for this interview. It's been extremely helpful for us and extremely valuable. Thank you so much for your time also.